On Monday, December 11th, 2023, BBC Scotland's health correspondent, Lisa Summers, spent a day shadowing an ambulance crew. Her experience dominated the news agenda that Thursday. It was the top story on the BBC Scotland website and led radio and TV bulletins. Accompanying her account were the latest ambulance turnaround figures which had been published the previous day.
Hello there, good morning. In the first week of December, 1 in every 10 ambulances here spent almost 2 hours outside a hospital because there was no space in A&E.
1 in every 10 ambulances spent almost 2 hours outside a hospital in the first week of December because there was no space in A&E. That's according to Scottish Ambulance Service's own figures. But just how big a problem is it? Well, our health correspondent Lisa Summers has been out with a paramedic crew in Edinburgh. She's with us now. Lisa, just tell us a bit more about what you witnessed then when you were out with them.
Despite BBC Scotland's melodramatic and curiously negative presentation of the figures, they weren't particularly noteworthy. The turnaround figure has fluctuated between 90 minutes and 2 hours for several weeks. 2 hours was actually a slight improvement on the previous month. Ambulances were also the subject of Thursday's Radio Scotland phone-in.
And now it's over to Stephen Jardine to find out what's happening over on BBC Radio Scotland.
With 1 in 10 Scottish ambulances spending more than 2 hours parked up outside A&E last week, what's been your experience of accessing emergency medical care?
What was going on? Why the unusual focus on ambulances? It was beginning to look like an agenda was at play. Thursday is also the day First Minister's Questions is held. Would ambulances feature? The answer was yes.
Figures released yesterday show that 1 in every 10 ambulances in Scotland sat outside hospitals for hours waiting for patients to be admitted.
Not only did Douglas Ross choose ambulances as his line of attack, the Scottish Conservative leader had a pre-prepared Freedom of Information request to hand.
So we've done an FOI request, and I've got the response here on ambulance waiting times across Scotland. They show some of the worst turnaround times on record.
It all looked suspiciously coordinated. The Lunchtime Reporting Scotland broadcast did nothing to dispel those suspicions, with the station's political editor, Glenn Campbell, bolstering Douglas Ross's attack.
Well, this issue dominated exchanges at question time in the Scottish Parliament this afternoon. And our political editor, Glenn Campbell, was there and watching, and I think he has some company in the lobby this afternoon. Glenn, the Deputy First Minister stood in for Humza Yousaf today.
At First Minister's question time with the Deputy First Minister, Shona Robertson, in for Humza Yousaf, and she was asked very directly by the Conservative leader about rising waiting times for ambulances and the backlog that can sometimes happen when they're kept waiting to discharge patients into accident emergency at hospitals around the country.
We can reveal that an ambulance was waiting outside a hospital in Ayrshire for 15 hours.
It was the same on the evening edition of Reporting Scotland.
Tonight on Reporting Scotland, concerns over ambulance waiting times. Earlier, the issue dominated question time at the Scottish Parliament. The leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, accused the government of overseeing shocking ambulance response times. The Deputy First Minister, Shona Robertson, admitted it wasn't acceptable, but highlighted the fact that similar issues were being faced across the UK.
We'll never know whether BBC Scotland deliberately set out to help the Scottish Conservatives by creating a news agenda that dovetailed perfectly with Douglas Ross's attack at First Minister's Questions. All we can say with certainty is that the broadcaster's bizarre decision to focus so much time and resources on ambulances was fortuitous for the Scottish Conservative leader and unfortunate for the SNP. Shona Robertson's claim that similar issues were being seen across the UK was true. The English ambulance service featured on the UK BBC that same day.
Ambulance service staff and leaders say winter pressures are already beginning to affect the NHS and patients are being put at risk by dangerous delays.
Crews are enduring long waits outside accident and emergency departments in England because hospitals are struggling to deal with overcrowded wards.
There were ambulances parked out there. There's ambulances parked out there today. There's no beds.
It's the largest accident and emergency hospital in Cumbria, but it's not big enough. It's already at capacity. There's no more beds. There's no more room in accident and emergency, with around 50 patients waiting to be seen. With space in hospitals running out already and doctors about to strike, the NHS forecast is bleak.
30% of patients waited longer than the target 4 hours in A&E last month, while last week over a third of patients arriving at hospital by ambulance waited more than 30 minutes instead of the target 15.
The difference between the BBC's English and Scottish coverage is that there was no politicisation of the English ambulance figures and no sign of the UK political editor. Why the difference? Strangely, BBC Scotland failed to mention the English ambulance figures or point out that Douglas Ross was attacking the SNP over its management of a service that is performing better than the one his own party presides over in England. It's almost as though the broadcaster didn't want to undermine his carefully planned attack. But there's more. 4 days later, BBC Wales ran its own report on ambulances. It revealed a service on the brink, with taxis having to be called because there were no ambulances.
I have been lying on the floor here for over an hour and the neighbours have been fantastic, but the ambulance is still not here.
Quite often we don't have any ambulance to send.
But sometimes they say they have no other option but to ask families or even taxis to take seriously ill patients in.
Morning, it's 5:20. We've been queuing since about 2 o'clock with a patient that's been here since 10 o'clock last night.
Despite the dire state of the Welsh ambulance service, there were no political attacks on the Labour-led Welsh government. Sadly, this is typical of the BBC. The broadcaster employs a very different editorial policy in Scotland than it does in England and Wales when it comes to the NHS. Almost every Scottish NHS issue is politicised and every opportunity provided for unionist politicians to attack the SNP. Scottish Labour and the Scottish Conservatives are almost always handed a platform when an NHS story is broadcast. As if to underline the different editorial policy, on the same day it revealed the dire state of the Welsh ambulance service, the BBC revealed that junior doctors in Wales had voted to go on strike.
And there are further problems for the NHS this winter as junior doctors in Wales vote to take strike action over pay.
That, too, wasn't politicised. BBC Scotland is the only branch of the UK-wide service to routinely politicise the NHS. It's the default behaviour for the broadcaster. Here are a few examples.
The Scottish Conservatives are calling for the resignation of the Health Secretary after she apologised to Parliament for providing incorrect figures about the number of hospital patients sent to care homes without being tested for coronavirus. The Scottish Conservatives say the public have lost confidence in Jean Freeman over the handling of care homes. They want her to resign. Will she?
Jean Freeman insists she should stay in post. The Scottish Tories disagree.
This drip, drip, drip of serious information and concern about our NHS shows that the Health Secretary has lost confidence.
I want answers. I want to be clear what she knew.
Yeah, and Katie, Ruth Davidson's been talking about this in her column in the Mail on Sunday.
In the Mail, yes, she has. I mean, it's really, her column is entitled, Lies, More Lies, and Why This Minister Has to Go.
Health Secretary Hamza Yousaf says government ministers will never contemplate charging people for the NHS treatment. Opposition parties are calling for the Health Secretary to resign.
Senior managers in NHS boards across the country have been warning the Scottish Government about how tough things are.
It's clear, though, that Hamza Yousaf has lost the trust of frontline staff. It's clear through these minutes the SNP cannot be trusted on health, and it's time the Cabinet Secretary resigned or was sacked.
Have you lost the confidence of those who lead this service?
But do NHS bosses here have confidence in ministers, and especially in the Health Secretary Hamza Yousaf?
In England and Wales, the BBC reports on the NHS for public service reasons. In Scotland, it exploits the NHS for political reasons.